The sun rose pale over the Maplewood County Hospital, light spilling through blinds that hadn't been opened in days. Sarah Reeves lay motionless, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside her. The room smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked air. Her wrist was bandaged, her ribs bruised, and her throat burned from screaming. But she was alive. Alive! The word echoed faintly in her mind, fragile and unfamiliar, like something borrowed, not earned. She turned her head slowly toward the window. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had happened. Nurses walking past, cars gliding down wet streets, a father laughing with his child in the courtyard below. And she wondered, how do you go back to life when the man who tried to take it still exists? The door creaked open. Detective Marsh stepped in, holding a steaming cup of coffee. His face looked older, worn from too many sleepless nights. "Morning," he said softly. Sarah tried to smile. "You came back. Couldn't stay away," he replied, setting the coffee on the table. "Besides, Internal Affairs has a lot of questions. About Daniel, about the department." Her expression darkened. "Are they actually doing something?" He nodded. "This time, yes. Because of you." Sarah looked away, staring at her reflection in the window. "Feels strange." Being believed, a week later, she was released from the hospital under police protection. The media had already gotten wind of the story. Local officer accused of abuse, but the headlines were cautious, respectful, almost skeptical. To them, she was still the cop's wife. The woman in the shadow of his badge. Paparazzi cameras flashed as she left the hospital, the clicks sounding like gunfire. "Mrs. Reeves, is it true you tried to kill your husband? Do you regret what happened that night?" She didn't answer. Marsh shielded her with his jacket as they got into the car. "Let them talk," he murmured. "The truth's coming." They drove through the outskirts of town. The trees along the road glowed gold in the late afternoon sun, the same road where the chase had ended. As they passed the old bridge, Sarah's chest tightened. She could still see the flash of headlights, the rain, the scream of metal. That sound would never leave her. "Do you think he'll hate me?" she whispered. Marsh glanced at her. "He already did. That's why you're here and he's not." Sarah nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the fading horizon. "Then maybe that's enough." A month later, the courthouse stood like an old stone fortress in the center of town. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Reporters lined the walls, pens ready. Sarah sat quietly beside her lawyer, her hair now short and dark, not from fear, but from renewal. She wasn't hiding anymore. Across the room, Daniel sat in a wheelchair, his leg in a brace, his eyes burning with something between anger and disbelief. His badge, once his pride, lay sealed in an evidence bag on the prosecution's table. The bailiff called the room to order. "All rise. Court is now in session." The trial began with facts, police reports, photographs, 911 call logs, internal memos. But it was the silences between them that spoke loudest. Each time the prosecutor read a date: June 8, 2022, July 17, 2023, Sarah remembered what those nights had felt like. The sound of footsteps approaching the door, the smell of whiskey on his breath, the bruises she covered with makeup before church. At one point, the defense attorney called her unstable, said she had a history of exaggerating. The judge warned him to mind his tone, but the words still cut deep. Old wounds reopened, old fears whispered again, until Detective Marsh took the stand. Marsh's testimony was direct, quiet, but damning. He spoke about missing police records, about officers who admitted under oath that Daniel's domestic calls were handled internally, about the code of silence that let him keep his badge for years. Then he turned to the jury and said, "This isn't just about one man. It's about the silence that protects him." And he pointed gently toward Sarah, broke that silence. For the first time, the courtroom was truly still. When it was Sarah's turn, her palms were sweating. Her lawyer touched her arm. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "I do." She stepped to the stand. The microphone hissed softly. "I met Daniel when I was 22, she began. "He was kind, protective, funny. Everyone loved him. So did I." Her voice trembled, but she went on. "And then, it started. Small things at first. Jealousy, anger, apologies. Then worse." She paused, her eyes locking with his across the courtroom. "There were nights I prayed for him to hit me in a way people could see, because bruises were easier to explain than fear." A woman in the gallery quietly began to cry. Sarah swallowed hard. "I called the police once, twice, 3 times. No one came. They said they'd handle it internally. I learned what that meant." Her voice broke. "It meant they were protecting him, not me." She took a deep breath. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for truth. When she stepped down, Daniel's defense collapsed. His own colleagues testified against him, one admitting he'd been ordered to erase a domestic report to avoid departmental embarrassment. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Sarah waited in a side room, staring at her trembling hands, feeling like her heart might break from the waiting. When the bailiff finally called them back in, she could barely stand. On all counts, the forewoman said, her voice steady, we find the defendant guilty. Daniel's head dropped. His jaw clenched. Sarah's eyes filled, but not with tears, with release. For the first time in years, she could breathe without permission. The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder through the courtroom. Later that day, Sarah stood on the courthouse steps, reporters swarming. Microphones flashed in her face. Mrs. Reeves, do you have a message for victims out there? She took a deep breath, the wind brushing her hair. Yes, she said clearly. You can survive. And your voice matters. Cameras flashed. The moment would go viral within hours, but for Sarah, it wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. That night, she visited the women's shelter she had once slept in after running away years before. The same cracked walls, the same faint smell of lavender. A young woman sat in the corner, holding her baby, eyes swollen from crying. Sarah sat beside her and smiled gently. I know, she said quietly. It feels like the world's ending. But it's not. It's just beginning. The woman looked up, tears glistening. How did you do it? Sarah squeezed her hand. I stopped trying to survive for him and started surviving for me. 6 months later, Sarah moved to another state. She got a small job at a counseling center, helping women rebuild their lives. She still had nightmares, nights when the sound of rain brought her back to the bridge, to the scream of metal and gunfire. But she learned to wake up, breathe, and remind herself, it's over. On her living room wall hung a single framed newspaper clipping, officer convicted in domestic abuse case after wife speaks out. Below it, a handwritten note, you saved lives you'll never meet. One evening, she returned home from work to find a letter in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, I never deserved your love, but I see now that you deserved better. Daniel, she stood there in silence for a long time. Then she walked to the riverbank behind her apartment, the same kind of river that nearly claimed her life, and let the letter drift into the water. She watched as it soaked, sank, and disappeared. The next morning, Sarah sat on a park bench, sipping coffee and watching children play. For the first time, laughter didn't feel like something from another world. She pulled out her phone and opened the message draft she'd been writing for months, an open letter to victims. She read the words again, then finally hit post. To anyone trapped in silence, you are not weak. You are not to blame. There is a way out. And when you find it, I promise, the world will meet you there. She put the phone down, leaned back, and smiled through quiet tears. The sun was warm. The wind was gentle. And Sarah Reeves, once the cop's wife, once the silent victim, was finally free.